So I'm going to talk through my experience so far on the HSST programme, and going from, I've just noticed it says annual trust meeting at the top, ignore that, and going through sort of the experiences and lessons I've learned from going from being a biomedical scientist to stepping into an HSST trainee position in a department where we haven't had any clinical scientists before, let alone any HSSTs. So I'm very aware that I'm not at the end of the HSST, and this is very much a work in progress. And it's a very personal talk. So if nothing resonates with you and there's nothing that you can take away, that's fine. But maybe there's a few things that I'll say that will strike a chord with you, or some challenges that maybe you faced. So just sort of take what you need. If there's something. So we're going to talk about being the first in a department, what that looks like, what that can feel like. I'm going to talk about sort of boundaries and how you navigate through the challenges and everything that's asked of you in a new role. I'm going to talk about living on the edge of your previous scope of practice and the challenges that can throw up. And then I'm going to talk about a bit about communication and why it's so important that we talk to people about the HSST. Next slide, please, Sally. Thanks. So a little bit more about me. Like I said, this is quite a personal presentation. So I've been a biomedical scientist for about 20 years now. And it's been a sort of convoluted path to get where I am now. It hasn't been very linear. I've had a few job changes, and I also left the profession for 5 to 6 years to start a family whilst I was living abroad in Germany. So on coming back to the UK, I had to start as an MLA. And then I did MLA's job. So that's a medical laboratory assistant. So that's a band 2 position, and I was bank when I first came back. And then I've gone on to get re-accredited as a biomedical scientist, and I've gone up through the pathway and ended up as a senior biomedical scientist. And then I was lucky enough to be invited to join the HSST as an in-service post as a biomedical scientist. So one of the first entrants onto the course by that route. And then whilst doing that, I've gained equivalence as a clinical scientist through the Academy of Healthcare Science. So it's not it hasn't been the conventional route to come in as a biomedical scientist before. And biomedical and clinical scientists in micro and consultant clinical scientists in microbiology is very new. Other pathology disciplines like biochemistry have a really well-established pathway, but microbiology, I think we're still finding our feet as to, especially in district general hospitals like I work in Gloucester. I think we're still trying to find our feet as to what roles would look like there, where there isn't a vast research pathway. And the job of the clinical liaison has always been done by medical colleagues. So I think we're still sort of finding our way. And on the screen there, you can see the words that I've heard bandied about to describe me and my role in the department. I get told quite often that, you're leading the way for others and you've got to be an example for others. And, it's an inspiration to see someone doing that. And I don't always get comfort from these words. I think it's very true. I think all of them are accurate of my journey, and the department's journey as a whole in Gloucester into creating this role. But they give me a bit of the ick. I feel that there's an awful lot of pressure that comes from banding those words around when you're trying to navigate your way into a new role. Could you put the next slide up, please, Sally? So I was going to talk a little bit about being the first, and the move from biomedical scientist to the sole HSST in the department came with a lot of challenges. There was a lack of a clear job role because we were still trying to work out what that was going to look like. I suddenly had new management and leadership responsibilities that I hadn't had previously as a senior biomedical scientist. Although I'd led teams of biomedical scientists and I'd run sections, what I hadn't had was leadership and management skills for staff groups that weren't scientific. I think as a group of people, we are slightly different from other people, and our career paths are laid out, and the management and the leadership and the care of those groups can be quite different. So I was suddenly landed with the medical secretaries, which was a very different experience to manage and lead that group of individuals compared with what I'd experienced before. I'd also moved to a new team. So instead of being within the lab team with people I'd worked with for a number of years, I was suddenly down the other end of the corridor with the consultants. And this team move and all of these new responsibilities and this lack of a clear job role actually left me feeling quite isolated, and I felt quite lonely. And on some days, I was in an office on my own, not really knowing what I was doing with my time. Whilst everyone else got on around me, I was supposed to be finding these roles and responsibilities for myself. And I think one of those big changes for me was that being in control of your own work for the first time, after having rotated bench responsibilities and senior management responsibilities in the lab. And like I said, I found this quite isolating and lonely. And I actually took this problem to our active learning steps from the University of Manchester. And one of the tutors there said something that really changed the way I viewed that. And she said, "Is there not some power in no one knowing what you're doing? Is there not some power in being able to carve this out to be exactly what you want for the next 5 to 6 years?" And I thought, I suppose there is. Instead of sitting there negative, thinking no one's telling me what to do and I'm at loose end and I'm not really sure where this is all going. And perhaps I felt that people were quite disinterested in the role because I wasn't having that engagement with people that I thought I would get. It was quite useful to reframe it and sort of step into it with a little bit more empowerment and a little bit more curiosity as to where can I get this role to go? How often do you get to plan this out yourself? And I know this won't be true for anyone else, but there might be some people that are sort of given this opportunity because there's no blueprint for what an HSST would look like in a hospital that's never had one before. And there needs to be a lot of collaboration within the department to develop the role. And one of the recommendations I think I would make to people who are new to the course is try and pin down what the role expectations are early. Try and find out what your roles and responsibilities are going to be at the start, at the middle, and at the end, so that there's a clear progression as to how you will navigate your way from being very, very new in the post through that middling ground where you're taking on some more responsibilities, you've developed your clinical skills a little bit more, and then at the end, especially if you're in service, what the department thinks your job's going to be at the end. And I think the earlier you can pin those down, the easier it is to navigate those feelings of isolation, loneliness, and perhaps feeling not fully utilised in the department. So all of this also will help you shape your training plan and your one file evidence, and it'll give you a framework to try and choose those opportunities that are presented to you as well. Because the one thing the HSST does offer up for people is the opportunity to step out of the day-to-day and try something that's a little bit different, whether that's talking at conferences, whether that's teaching on courses, and you have to be careful, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about creating opportunities and making sure that you're making the most of your time. Another thing I found very beneficial was to find a mentor. The NHS does offer free mentorship and coaching as part of its leadership academy, and you can find details of that within your trust. I fell into one that's a lot less formal with a senior member of the management team in my department. And that's been, invaluable to have someone outside of your chain of reporting that you can just bounce ideas off. to have a sort of mirror to discuss problems and challenges you're having. I offer mentoring to some STPs, not within my trust, from another trust. And I think what I realised when speaking to them is sometimes you just need someone impartial to talk these problems through. You generally know the answer yourself, or you can find a way to navigate it yourself. But sometimes sitting alone with that problem makes it very difficult to see past the noise. So I would recommend trying to find someone who you can ask questions of or discuss challenges with, and reach out to others. There's a huge network of HSSTs, and we're all at different stages and we're all in different disciplines. But you'd be surprised when you start talking within these communities how many people are going through the same issues as you. If one brave person starts speaking out on one of these about how they're feeling, you'd be guaranteed that there's others that are feeling exactly the same thing. And I've noticed that with the girls that I mentor at one of the other trusts, the STPs I mentor, all three of them, unbeknownst to them, were having exactly the same problem at the same time, but they didn't talk to each other because they didn't think that that would be something that the other people would want to hear. They thought it was only them having those problems, and I can guarantee you it probably won't be. So that brings me on to the last point, which is be a leaf on a tree. A leaf on a tree will survive a lot longer than a leaf blowing in the breeze. It might feel great to be lifted up and free and doing your own thing for a while, but as soon as you settle and you're not attached to that tree anymore, that big living organism, you're not going to survive for very long. And I think, yeah, be a leaf on a tree, find those connections and try and stay with people. This journey will be a lot easier if you're navigating it as part of many and not on your own. Next slide, please, Sally. Yeah. So while saying, the HSST brings many opportunities, it's really important that we don't say yes to everything. At the beginning of the HSST, I said yes to everything. I took every opportunity going. I agreed to sit on every meeting that I was asked to sit on. I took on any tasks that needed doing. I was driven and enthusiastic, and I felt like I needed to make myself indispensable. But yes is a dangerous word sometimes. By deciding to say yes to everything and putting myself forward, I put pressure on myself that I didn't need, and eventually I ended up burning out. And I can tell you that is a miserable place to be. And it's difficult to come back from. And the picture on the screen there, taken from a paper by Kinman, shows you the trajectory of burnout. And I think as, high performing people in healthcare science, we sit at the top of that with high expectations and idealisms, and we're on a training course that stretches out in front of us, that gives us all of the opportunities we need, and then all of this extra pressure on how to do it properly. And if you're the sole person in your job and the pioneer or the legacy, you feel you need to say yes and succeed at all of these. But it is a slippery slope. And the HSST is a marathon, not a sprint. And whilst I appreciate that not everyone has a fixed post at the end of this, and you are trying to you're trying to sell yourself, but you have to get to the end of this HSST first, and you deserve to have a life outside of work. So just, check in with yourself and make sure that you're, regularly thinking about how you're feeling and how you're experiencing work. And then hopefully prevention is better than a cure, and you can maybe, take steps to try and not overstress yourself. Recognition and prevention is the key, as well as realizing that no one is immune to this. And the thing is, you don't know necessarily that you're going down that route until it's too late. So developing that sort of self-reflection, this is all very A3. If you haven't done A3 yet, you've got all this to come. Having that ability to check in with yourself and take steps sooner rather than later. So I would say, outside of your core responsibilities and the things you absolutely have to do, be picky about what you spend your time on and curate your opportunities. Start to narrow in on the things that you are going to get value for, whether that's essential for evidence for the one file, it's essential to the end role, it's essential to what the department needs from you at the time, but then also throw in a bit of sparkle and take some opportunities that keep you interested and give you joy to do. But if it isn't adding value, I wouldn't do it. And I would be brave enough, hopefully, to say so. And I would recommend that you kind of put boundaries in place, because it's quite easy in a trainee role or a supernumerary role that some of us are in, not me, but some people are, to feel that you can be spread too thin by the demands of work. Yes can be a dangerous word, but only sometimes. Next slide, please, Sally. Thanks. So this next one is a quote at the top: life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And I think that's quite a familiar phrase. I've got it in a canvas in my downstairs toilet. It was bought for me for my partner when I was prepping to do a 100K ultra race. And he thought putting it in the toilet would remind me to keep pushing through when things became hard. And I think since starting the HSST, there's been many moments where I feel right at the edge of my comfort zone and at times perhaps out of my depth. But isn't that the point of the course, to kind of push and challenge ourselves? And then we can grow through these challenges and these feelings of maybe just being very close to our edge. And I expect that there's many of us in this room, and I was talking to Sally about it before you all joined, that perhaps have what could be described as imposter syndrome. Should I be in this position? Am I good enough? Am I keeping up with everyone else? But I personally have found a way to kind of turn that on its head in a way. So the graph that's on there is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I think is picked up in one of the A modules, and it describes the changes in confidence that come when you're learning something new. So confidence is very high at the beginning, but it could at the period where you don't know very much. And if we stick there, that's dangerous. That's arrogant. And within our line of work, you can't fake it till you make it. You have to be based within your limitations, and you have to seriously consider where your scope starts and ends. You then move into what is called the valley of despair. And I think this is where imposter syndrome sits for a lot of us. We suddenly realize that we've got so much more that we don't know. And I felt like that coming out of a biomedical science job into the clinical job. Suddenly there was so much that I didn't know. And you do hit a bit of despair, thinking, I'm never going to get it. I don't know how other people know this and I don't. And we realize how far there is to climb to get to that level where, we are competent in the areas we need to be, and that our confidence has bounced back so we can put ourselves forwards in the right situations and in the right way. And I think this process is totally normal. And as conscious, dedicated, individuals and scientists, we always feel that we have more to know, but we're also very conscious of our limitations. And I think within this, we just need to treat ourselves with some kindness and make sure that we seek out support, because you probably are on the right track. And whilst imposter syndrome is, sometimes an uneasy feeling to sit with, it shouldn't stop us from taking opportunities. And I think if you can view it a little bit more like this, like, why am I feeling like this? Oh, it's because I'm still learning and I'm still taking the time to find out where I sit on this slope of enlightenment, as they call it. You might find it easier to navigate those instances where you feel like perhaps you're you don't belong. So I think support from each other can help us navigate through those. And I think if you voice it again, you'll find out you're not the only one. And I think coming into year 3, year 4, I know definitely in my cohort within microbiology, we all had quite a lot of us had a moment where we just thought, oh my God, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. The workload goes up. The expectations for you at work goes up. The PhD kicks in, the doctorate kicks in. And you really do feel that maybe you're not good enough and you're not going to do it, but you're not the only one. And it's part of this progress of learning. So as I've said before, it's a marathon and it's not a sprint. And you need to look for things that aren't just those easy wins. And sometimes that means finding successes, outside of work or sort of more long-term goals. It's quite easy to just keep going after the quick pat on the head at work because you've, taken on an extra project you need, or, you've put another abstract into a conference that you really haven't got time to go for. I think you need to be quite cognizant that some of these successes won't pay off for a while into the future, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing our time into them. It's not just the easy wins. We need to make sure we also keep in sight the more important wins, which are perhaps the things that happen outside work. So family, children, hobbies, those kind of things as well. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide because I was only planning on doing 10 minutes. I've already managed to stretch it out to 20, but you'll be pleased to hear that this is the last one. So one part of the HSST that I haven't struggled with is talking about it. And I expect we've all been asked the many, many questions as to what do you do? What is an HSST? What can you do for me? How can I help you? And unfortunately, this could be within the team you work for. And I found that since moving into the HSST trainee post in my microbiology department, I'm still being asked now, 4 or 5 years into the job, exactly what it is I'm doing and what the end result's going to be. So if you're the first to create a pathway and a framework, it's really important that you reach out to people that understand the training process and the roles, whether that's the national school or whether that's other centres that have already had HSSTs go through them. So that you can then sell it to people locally with this is what the end result looks like. This is what you're gaining. And tell everyone, we have so many disciplines where HSSTs are in place and they're not common across all trusts. So I feel that we have a responsibility to kind of shout it from the rooftops and tell everyone about what these roles could be. I mean, HSST, is really designed to boost multidisciplinary working and team diversification. And all of that depends on us understanding each other's roles. So what I've done, which I found was really useful, is I've done a talk on this to medical grand rounds, where you get a lot of clinical colleagues who have no idea what healthcare scientists do and have even a less idea of what an HSST is. I've given teaching to F1s and F2s because we might as well get them on the ground. And then departmental meetings, I've kept people updated as to what my training looks like and, what my project's going to be on and things like that. And I always introduce myself to anyone I meet on ward rounds or in clinics. And I answer questions about my role if they bring them up. And I think it's important to mention the similarities to clinical colleagues. If in life sciences, it's easier to do that mapping than it is in others. I appreciate that. But to mention the similarities with clinical colleagues, because that builds trust and understanding as to what your level of knowledge might be. But it's also really important to highlight your USPs. What's the unique selling point of this? In my case, that's 20 years of diagnostic microbiology and lab operations. But if you have these conversations with people, you'll find yourself invited to meetings that that the department really should have been on years ago, but they didn't know who to ask and there wasn't the right person before. So I think building relationships with other teams is invaluable, really, to get the most success out of creating this role within your department. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that was sort of, a very personal rambling, I suppose, about how I found the last sort of 5 years stepping out of biomedical science, where you are, the hidden task force within the NHS, like a lot of healthcare science professions are, and then having to be out and in the front and meeting more of our clinical colleagues and, other NHS professions that we might not have been exposed to before. And I think the one message that I would want people to take away is, be kind to yourself, look after yourself, and the rest of it will all fall into place. Don't rush through this. Find boundaries, find steady ground, and then build from there. Thank you very much for listening.